guys can print your speeches if you like. You don't want to?
Two. One, two. Two.
really
Good morning. The eternal God is our refuge, and he is indeed a strong tower. Morning, youth parliamentarians. Today, I want to remind you that leadership is not about age, but courage, conviction, and character. Timothy was a young man entrusted with a great responsibility. And Paul encouraged him not to let his youth be seen as a weakness, but rather as a platform to set an example. You stand here today as representatives of your generation, chosen to speak on the behalf of the young people of your nations. Your voice is rising at a critical time. You stand at the brink between what has been done and what has to be done. That is no small task. When you debate policies, propose solutions, and engage in dialogue, you are helping to shape the direction of your country. Radical change is needed. What has worked is no longer working. The need for fresh ideas and the development of our nations are needed. Your presence, your voice, your example displays that young voices are not only relevant, but they are necessary. But remember, the foundation of true leadership is not just eloquence or ambition. We don't just need passionate speakers with bright ideas, but young leaders with integrity, young leaders with humility, young leaders with a willingness to serve rather than be served. Jesus himself said, "Whoever wants to be great amongst you must first be your servant." Leadership in God's kingdom and in any nation that desires to prosper must begin with service. So as you take your seats, speak your words, and cast your vision for better nations, let your speech be seasoned with wisdom, your conduct marked with respect, and your motives guided by love for your people. You may be young, but you are not too young to set a standard of honesty, courage, and faith. The future of your country does not just belong to you, it is being built by you right now. Every idea you share, every problem you tackle, every solution you propose is a brick laid in foundation of tomorrow's world. Build wisely, build faithfully, and build with God at the center. Let us pray. Lord, we thank you for these young leaders gathered here today. Bless them with wisdom beyond their years, courage in the face of challenges, and humility in their service. May their words and actions inspire not only their peers, but the entire nation to pursue justice, unity, and righteousness. Guide their steps as they build a better country, and may they never forget that you, and with you, all things are possible. In Jesus' name, amen.
Good morning, esteemed delegates, distinguished guests, and members of the 18th Regional Youth Parliament. It is truly an honor to stand before you once again as Speaker of the House. I am deeply grateful for the confidence placed in me to return to this role, and I accept it with humility, with pride, and a deep sense of responsibility. On behalf of the entire Bahamas, I extend a very warm welcome to each of you. We are proud to host this year's sitting. I thank the organizing committee for choosing us once again as the host nation. Your decision is both a privilege and a responsibility that we embrace wholeheartedly. And as we gather to debate, to learn, and to grow together as a region. To each delegate, I welcome you not only to this parliament, but to a space where your perspectives matter, your questions are valid, and your ideas have the power to shape real change. We welcome the conversations, the collaboration, and the courage it takes to stand here today. So let us carry out this session with purpose, with respect for one another, and with pride for each region. I look forward to hearing your viewpoints. Once again, welcome and thank you. Resolutions. The chair recognizes the honorable member from the Bahamas, Tenzel Lightburn.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to move the following motion. Whereas the health of Earth's climate has been on a decline as a result of the growing presence of carbon and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and whereas the Earth has responded with rising temperatures and sea levels, stronger hurricanes, frequent mudslides, and other natural disasters. And whereas the unpredictability of the weather in response to the changes in the environment poses a risk to every country in the world, particularly small island developing nations like the Caribbean nations, many of which are low-lying. And whereas, in an attempt to save their countries, Caribbean leaders have united in their efforts to bring awareness to the catastrophic effects that climate change has and will have on small island developing nations, to hold those nations with the larger carbon footprint accountable, and to have access to finances to assist these countries in their mitigation, preparation, and recovery efforts. Now, therefore, be it resolved that this Regional Youth Parliament endorses the efforts of regional leaders to bring awareness to the existential threat that our countries face, to demand that the nations of the world take steps to reduce their carbon footprint in an effort to repair some of the damage to the environment, and to continue to agitate for Caribbean countries to have access to funding to help with mitigation, preparation, and recovery efforts. Now, therefore, be it further resolved that this Regional Youth Parliament wishes to make recommendations to the CARICOM on ways it can get leaders of the industrialized nations to reduce their carbon footprint and to provide funding for the mitigation, preparation, and recovery efforts. Madam Speaker, honorable dignitaries, my fellow youth parliamentarians, and guests, I rise with gratitude for the Pacific Island students fighting climate change, whose grassroots advocacy since 2019 prompted their leaders to request an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice on states' obligations in respect of climate change in 2023. Their persistence helped small island developing states to join hands, and the ICJ delivered on its historic opinion unanimously in July, providing the legal grounds to hold the world's major polluters accountable. This process reaffirmed an underestimated truth. Youth are not the leaders of tomorrow. No. We are the agitators and the change makers of today. My honorable members, we must seize this moment, not to compete or to pontificate, but to collaboratively declare our needs to ensure the Caribbean youth can enjoy, preserve, and enrich our nations. Large, wealthy, and industrialized countries have had the privilege of treating climate change as an abstract idea. However, it has shaped a haunting past and pressing reality in the SIDS, including the Caribbean. Across each of our sister CARICOM nations, we have suffered tremendous blows to the hands of climate change. No matter the country or the hazard, we share the trauma and anxiety that will persist long after the disasters have passed. Climate change threatens our collective future. The sixth assessment report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change notes that sea levels are likely to rise by 0.3 meters in 2050 and approximately 1 meter by 2100. This is unjust, as SIDS contribute less than 1% of the world's greenhouse gases, yet we suffer to stand the most. Madam Speaker, I address this honorable House as a public health advocate. My Master of Public Health training affirms that environmental is a pillar of the discipline. So my advocacy is guided by the One Health framework, which recognizes that the health of people, animals, and the environment are interconnected, and this balance is affected when one of them changes. Here are the evidences. PAHO and WHO's 2018 survey, conducted across 15 Caribbean countries, reported rising cases of vector-borne diseases, food insecurity, and climate-linked mental health issues like eco-anxiety and post-traumatic stress. The Food and Agriculture Organization observed that climate change influences the physiology and the immunity of livestock. And a 2017 Caribbean Marine Climate Change Report Card highlighted that consistent climate impacts can result in the decline of mangroves, a crucial part of nature's first line of defense. I did not expect my first big girl jobs to include producing and delivering potable water and drafting infection prevention controls to respond to Hurricane Dorian's impacts or the COVID-19 pandemic, implementing a national preparedness for effective response project to address the growing emergencies and prevent sexual exploitation and abuse, or deliberating with other Caribbean colleagues on how to revise international health regulations to suit our unique vulnerabilities. Climate change is not only an environmental crisis, but a public health injustice, and true justice requires reparations. This topic may feel uneasy or even irrelevant for some, but may I remind us that the industrialized nations built the wealth on the backs of our lands and our ancestors' slavery. Therefore, they owe us structural change, sustained investment, and climate accountability. Youth deserve a future that is livable, dignified, and just. SIDS must collectively demand resources and technical support from larger countries to strengthen our climate mitigation and adaptation at every level of the socio-ecological model of health. Programs from PAHO and the World Bank indicate that such investments are feasible. $2 to $3 per capita annually for sustainable health programs, $50,000 per community for integrated early warning systems and culturally relevant mental health support, $1.5 million per country for climate resilient health infrastructure and One Health training, $20 to $25 million per nation for national climate health strategies with annual region-wide support of $5 million. And at the global level, we demand the G7 and G20 nations donate to a SIDS Climate Health Mitigation and Reparations Fund as per the ICJ, cut their emissions to 50% by 2030 to agree with the Paris Agreement's 1.5 degrees Celsius target, eliminate their fossil fuel subsidies, which, by the way, reached $7 trillion globally in 2022, according to the International Monetary Fund, accept an annual climate justice scoreboard that tracks emissions, progress, and commitment to financial contributions at major global meetings like the UN General Assembly and COP, and support a climate Caribbean Youth Caucus that will follow up on these scorecards and hold them accountable. If they do not, then my recommendation is that we align with Pacific SIDS and African states to block a consensus at COP until our demands are met. These environmental demands are also public health necessities, and they echo CARICOM's 10-point plan on reparatory justice, namely point 5 that calls for repairing healthcare systems that have been weakened by colonial exploitation and now shattered by climate disasters, and point 8, which calls for the reconciliation of centuries of trauma from our slavery, now worsened by rising seas and lost lands. Madam Speaker, they also move us closer to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, including good health, clean water, reduced inequalities, and global partnerships. My honorable members, I repeat, this parliamentary session cannot be the end of our engagement. We must use every moment to fan the flames of a youth-led revolution on health, climate, and justice. If we do not, then we will be exiled and forced to seek refuge in the very nations whose emissions drove us from our shores. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Is there a seconder? The chair recognizes the honorable member from the Bahamas, Callie Adderley.
Thank you for your recognition, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to second this motion. As the Bahamas, like many low-lying island nations across the Caribbean, face escalating threats from climate change, such as rising sea levels, coral reef degradation, and intensified storms. While solutions often focus on hard infrastructure, nature-based strategies that harness the power of marine ecosystems hold transformative potential. Seagrass meadows in the Bahamas represent a global blue carbon hotspot, covering an estimated 47,000 square kilometers and sequestering approximately 123 million tons of carbon dioxide annually. Thus, seagrass could offset national emissions and even support carbon neutrality. These ecosystem services of Bahamian seagrass are valued at $156 billion per year, which includes $54 billion in carbon storage, accounting for 61% of the Caribbean's total seagrass carbon value. Phytoplankton, the microalgae forming the base of marine food webs and the base of the ocean's biological pump, play a central role in oceanic carbon capture, while seagrass meadows act as vital blue carbon sinks. Although difficult to quantify at the national level, phytoplankton underpin fisheries, coral resilience, and regional marine productivity. Phytoplanktons are vital for reef and ocean health. Research reveals that ocean warming is altering phytoplankton dynamics, while surface phytoplanktons are becoming less green, indicating lower chlorophyll levels. These communities play a distinct yet critical role in carbon export and ecosystem function. Expanding research and restoration efforts targeting these natural systems could help reverse climate impacts by enhancing carbon sequestration, bolstering marine health, and increasing coastal resilience. Investing in the health of phytoplankton and seagrass isn't just environmental stewardship. It is a strategic pathway for climate mitigation, biodiversity conservation, and sustainable development across CARICOM. Restoring phytoplankton can strengthen fisheries, restore nutrient cycles, and fortify coral reefs, addressing food security and economic stability in island nations. To add, protecting blue carbon ecosystems offers a scalable, cost-effective approach to reducing carbon dioxide emissions, thus leading to decreased ocean temperatures and presumably decreasing the rise in sea levels. To advance this strategy, Madam Speaker, I propose targeted research and restoration initiatives, establishing a plankton monitoring network around reefs, seagrass beds, and mangroves to track biomass and diversity. we can use satellite Earth observation models and pilot green infrastructures like seagrass nurseries and substrates to promote phytoplankton blooms. Nutrient-based projects using biofilters and mangrove buffers will improve water quality and prevent harmful blooms. Studies quantifying phytoplankton carbon capture via chlorophyll A, satellite imagery, and biological pump models are essential. Controlled experiments could explore how enhanced phytoplankton productivity supports coral resilience through feeding, shading, and nutrient cycling. These methods, once tested, could be adapted across the Caribbean as a scalable model for climate resilience. Regional collaboration on this front could amplify benefits through shared knowledge and resources. Success depends on funding and community partnership. As a pilot initiative, the Bahamas requires a 5-year budget of $2 to $3 million to support scientific infrastructure, restoration efforts, training, and outreach. Funding could come from the Green Climate Fund, Global Environment Facility, Carbon Biodiversity Fund, and partnerships with universities and non-government organizations. Community cooperatives would play active roles, assisting with plankton sampling and seagrass monitoring. Collected data would delegate national and regional marine policies and long-term adaptation planning. This method of enhancing blue carbon credits can strategically serve as a model for all CARICOM states, improving ecological and socio-economic resilience. And with this information in hand, the Bahamas would have stronger supporting data to secure compensation for the value of our seagrass beds in blue carbon credits, similar to how Guyana is paid to preserve their forests. Therefore, Madam Speaker, investing in phytoplankton research, seagrass mapping, and habitat restoration is a powerful nature-based solution for CARICOM's war against climate change. We can significantly reduce coastal erosion, coral decline, strengthen marine ecosystems, and enhance oceanic temperatures. Cornerstones of sustainable development and climate resilience. Additionally, this also means more come for me and future generations to come. Thus, as the effects of climate change accelerate, collaborative regional action grounded in nature-based solutions offers, in my humble opinion, one of the most hopeful and cost-effective paths forward. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
It has been moved and seconded that the following resolution be agreed. Whereas the health of the Earth's climate/environment has been on a decline as a result of growing presence of carbon and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and whereas the Earth has responded with the rising temperatures, sea levels, stronger hurricanes, frequent mudslides, and other natural disasters. And whereas the unpredictability of the weather in response to the climate change in environment pose a risk to every country in the world, particularly small island nations like the Caribbean nations, many of which are low-lying. And whereas, in an attempt to save their countries, Caribbean leaders have united in their efforts to bring awareness to the catastrophic events that climate change has and will have on small island nations, to hold these nations accountable with larger carbon footprints, and to have access to finances to assist these countries in their mitigation, preparation, and recovery efforts. Now, therefore, it be resolved that this Regional Youth Parliament endorses the efforts of regional leaders to bring awareness to the existential threat that countries in our region face, to demand nations of the world take steps to reduce their carbon footprint in an effort to repair some of the damage to the environment, and to continue to agitate for Caribbean countries to have access to funding to help with mitigation, preparation, and recovery efforts. Now, therefore, it be further resolved that this Regional Youth Parliament wishes to make recommendations to CARICOM on ways it can get leaders of the industrialized nations to reduce their carbon footprint and to provide funding for mitigation, preparation, and recovery efforts. As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member for the Bahamas, Amber Turner.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, honorable members of this Regional Youth Parliament, distinguished guests, good morning. We gather today under the weight of a weighty shared reality, a reality etched into the very landscape of our islands. This is not a standard regional sitting. Climate change has ignored borders, demands immediate attention, and is already reshaping the Caribbean's future. Climate change is not abstract. It has names, it has faces, it has stories, and it demands that we listen. I am of the position that the whereas clauses of our resolution should not be mere procedural formalities. The reality is there are obituaries for our coral reefs, emergency broadcasts for our coastal communities, and the desperate prayers of our farmers facing unpredictable droughts and rains. Honorable members, we are the generation of inheriting a crisis not of our own making. As a young Bahamian, I've seen the anxiety of my islands as hurricane seasons grow more ferocious. I've read the scientific reports that map my nation's potential submersion. I've seen the images of what my islands may look like 50 years from now. We stand on the front lines of a war emitted from the smokestacks and the tailpipes of distant industrialized nations. From the emergence of the Industrial Revolution, anthropogenic activity has altered this planet. Economic interests were prioritized over environmental protection, and the perspectives of smaller nations were disregarded. The intensifying storms, droughts, rising seas, oppressive heat, and eroding coastlines are not just symptoms of climate change. They are the resonances of choices made far from our shores. Decades of unimpeded industrial expansion, fossil fuel dependency, and environmental neglect driven by the ambitions of the global north have shaped this narrative. While some nations reap the benefits of rapid development, others have inherited the consequences. We did not arrive at this precarious juncture by accident. It is the result of a systemic imbalance that continues to manifest in the form of environmental degradation, economic disparity, and climate injustice. A system muddied by colonial-era exploitation, once used to justify slavery, is still alive today in the exploitation of the people and the ecosystems of the global south. And for decades, our regional leaders have courageously taken the fight to the world stage. They have stood as giants demanding accountability, justice, and finance. And I believe I can speak for all of my fellow youth parliamentarians when I say that we, this youth parliament, wholeheartedly endorse these efforts. We demand that major emitters honor their commitments, transition aggressively from fossil fuels, and provide the funding owed to us for mitigation, preparation, and recovery. The principle of common but differentiated responsibilities lies at the epicenter of this sitting. It reflects a shared global commitment to protect the climate for the benefit of the present and the future generations, while identifying that not all countries bear equal responsibility for the causes of climate change, nor do they possess the same capacity to address its impacts. Under this framework, developed nations are expected to lead in mitigation efforts and provide support to developing countries. But honorable members, while we must never cease holding the powerful accountable, we must also ask ourselves, are we waiting too passively for a solution that may never come from those who have benefited from our plight? It's time to recognize the immense power that we hold, not just in pleading with others, but in uniting amongst ourselves. There are over 65 million of us living in small island developing states across the globe. That is 65 million voices, 65 million minds, 65 million souls with a shared existential threat and a shared determination to survive. We are not just vulnerable dots on a map, we are a formidable network of resilience and innovation. Like the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, said, we should not beg for any apologies. We should demand them. And apologies mean nothing if they are insincere. While we demand sincere apologies with rapid-fire action, let us also demand more of ourselves. Let us forge a coalition of SIDS so powerful, so innovative, and so unified that the world has no choice but to follow our lead. Honorable members, we cannot continue to be the pristine playgrounds for citizens of the Western world, while those same nations act with impunity, contributing to the degradation and the loss of those very same playgrounds. Our sunshine is not just for their tourism experience, it is the fuel for our solar grids. Our ocean winds are not just for their enjoyment on their yachts, they are the energy for our future. Our shared intellect is our greatest natural resource. Therefore, our recommendations to CARICOM and all other SIDS must be bold and forward-thinking. We must advocate for the creation of a SIDS-wide knowledge and technology exchange where we share amongst ourselves best practices in climate-resilient agriculture, renewable energy, coastal management from the South China Sea to the Pacific to the Atlantic. We must establish a United SIDS advocacy bloc at every international forum, from the UN to the COP, to negotiate as a single powerful voice, leveraging our collective 65 million strong population. This is not about letting the global north off the hook. This is about us taking control of our destiny. It is about intra-collaborative efforts that make us less dependent on the promises of others. It's about building our own arc together. For far too long, global institutions have distanced themselves from the very processes designed to foster meaningful change. We must band together not just as individual nations, but as a united Caribbean. Resounding the CARICOM anthem that says, vow to join hands and to focus on building one Caribbean. As a people united, determined, and steadfast, we stand looking towards a brand new horizon. And honorable members, we must look beyond the global north and build lasting alliances with the global south. Because resilience is not built in silos, but an act of shared purpose and survival. And within our region lies institutions that have the potential to be the backbone of our resilience. CIMH to enhance our climate forecasting, SEDIMA to coordinate disaster response, CCRE to drive our sustainable energy transition, and the 5 Cs to develop effective region-specific solutions. Honorable members, these institutions are lifelines worthy of our collective regional investment. To close, I echo the words of former Maldivian President Mohamed Nasheed. We are not prepared to die. We have no intentions of dying. Though we are not winning the battle, we will keep our heads above water. For too long, we have been begging the polluters to stop polluting on ethical grounds, all to no avail, because they are not now, nor have they ever been listening to us. So we must struggle and do everything we can to survive. That struggle, that everything, must now include each other. Let our resolution today be more than words on a paper. Let it be a covenant between the SIDS, youth of the Caribbean, and our family and all SIDS. A covenant to unite, build, and to lead. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Guyana, Nigel Drepel.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Esteemed delegates and fellow youth parliamentarians, I rise with the voice of Guyana, a country of immense beauty, rainforests stretching endlessly, and a people of vibrant spirit. But today, I do not come to paint a postcard of paradise. I come with urgency, because the climate crisis is here. It is now, and it threatens our very survival. This resolution before us today is not a mere formality. It is a cry from nations like mine for immediate and decisive global action. Across the world, we see rising seas, scorching heat, and devastating storms. For small island nations and low-lying countries like Guyana, these are not distant warnings, but these are our lived realities, Madam Speaker. Imagine this. Our capital city, Georgetown, lies below sea level, shielded only by a wall. A 2024 World Bank report warns that rising seas could expose 100% of Guyana's coast, and that is where almost 90% of our people are living. Madam Speaker, that means that there's constant threats of flooding, threatening our homes, our food supply, and our very way of life. Our Caribbean neighbors are facing the same fate. Through hurricanes growing stronger, their coasts are eroding and their weather grows more unpredictable. And the thing is that we contribute the least to these global emissions, yet we are suffering the most. This is the great climate injustice of our age. But Madam Speaker, Guyana is not standing still. We are leading from the front. Just this July, Guyana proudly hosted the inaugural Global Biodiversity Alliance Summit, bringing together more than 140 nations, scientists, indigenous leaders, and youth from all across the world to chart a bold future for protesting and protecting our nature. Out of that summit came the Georgetown Declaration, a landmark commitment to integrate biodiversity into development and finance, and the launch of the world's first border-to-border national biodiversity information system, alongside our low-carbon development strategy, also referred to as LCDS 2030. These efforts prove that Guyana is committed to balancing development with environmental stewardship. But let me be clear, Madam Speaker and my fellow youth parliamentarians, Guyana cannot do this alone. Our forests, our strategies, our summits, they're all powerful, but they cannot compensate for the inaction of others. We are pulling our weight and more, but if the world's largest polluters do not act, our efforts will be in vain. Madam Speaker, some may question Guyana's role as an oil producer, but for us, oil revenue is not a contradiction, it is a necessity. It is how we fund our schools, how we fund our hospitals, build stronger sea defenses, and invest in renewable energy. And we remain committed to being a net zero emitter, leveraging our forest and sustainable practices as we continue to develop our beloved country. Yet, Madam Speaker, the harsh truth remains. The climate crisis was not created in Georgetown. It was not created in Bridgeton. It was not created in Piarco or even in Nassau. It was created and born out of centuries of unchecked industrialization in the developed world. Countries like the United States, China, and India, those are the countries who are profiting the most from pollution, and they carry a moral responsibility to lead in fixing this crisis. And yet, their actions remain too weak, their promises remain too hollow, and their finance so scarce it is yet to be seen. What we are demanding, Madam Speaker, is not charity. We are demanding justice. Climate finance must be delivered absolute, accessible, and unconditional. The Loss and Damage Fund must be operationalized and capitalized. Not tomorrow, not next week, not next month, in fact, not even today. It was supposed to be done yesterday, Madam Speaker. As the Regional Youth Parliament, we must raise our voice and put forward precise demands. And as such, we are recommending that CARICOM must continue to speak as one collective voice, strong and unwavering. Unity remains our greatest strength, and too often small states are marginalized in global negotiations. Our voices are drowned out by louder and larger powers. But I present to you today that when CARICOM speaks with a single voice, the world will be compelled to listen to us. The unity should extend beyond speeches at UN or COP conferences, but it should be met with actions. We must translate into joint negotiating teams and put together a CARICOM climate negotiation task force staffed with legal, financial, and scientific experts, ensuring that our delegations are equipped with the same data, strategies, and demands. And by aligning our positions, we can enhance our influence and attract investment. Madam Speaker, we must not speak only when it is easy or when it is convenient, but we must understand that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Secondly, the current climate finance system is flawed. Being slow, complex, and often restrictions make funds unusable for vulnerable countries. We need new, fair, and efficient models. Debt for climate swatch swaps offer a way to turn debt into climate and biodiversity investments benefiting both the environment and the development. In Guyana, we say that easy lesson, hard for learn. And so with that, I want to emphasize that the importance of empowering our youth is upon us today. Climate education and youth empowerment is important for the fight for climate change to continue with energy and purpose. Our young people should be able to understand the gravity of the issues at hand so that when we take over the leadership of this world, we know what we are fighting for. Madam Speaker, colleagues, I want to submit to you today. It is time that we go beyond the eloquent speeches and the beautiful suit and ties that we're dressed in and all the conferences. It is time that we start to meet our words and our theories with actions. It is time that we put our foot on the ground and start working. I thank you.
The chair recognizes the honorable member from the Bahamas, Alexandria and Bristol.
Greetings, Madam Speaker. I stand here today not just as a representative of a small island nation, but as one of the many voices advocating for a cause that is greater than our land mass and population size combined. The Caribbean, our people, heritage, and culture, along with other small island developing states, 57 nations in total, contribute less than 1% to global greenhouse gas emissions. Yet, we have two countries, such as the US and China, that are responsible for over 11% and 30% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Nonetheless, we find ourselves on the front lines of hurricanes, extreme heat, rising sea level, and biodiversity loss. Ironically, we are leading the global transformation and fight against climate change, and industrialized nations must follow. Madam Speaker, this paradox is not surprising to many of us. According to the Healthcare Without Harm organization, if the healthcare sector were a country, it would rank as the 5th largest emitter. Globally, approximately 5% of greenhouse gas emissions come from the healthcare sector. However, in industrialized countries, this overlooked contributor can exceed that 5%, with some countries reaching nearly 10% of their national emissions. We must encourage these larger nations to apply the same precision they use in medicine to climate mitigation in healthcare. They can start by, 1, embedding carbon-conscious practices in healthcare facility design and energy use. 2, mandating procurement of low-emission medical equipment and minimizing single-use plastics. 3, sharing green technologies and training with vulnerable nations. And lastly, increase and support research partnership to study climate health links and develop palpable and cost-effective interventions. Madam Speaker, these are not favors we're asking. They are moral imperatives aligned with the fundamental principles of healthcare and the Paris Agreement. Do no harm. As a region, we have begun reducing our healthcare emissions through PAHO's Smart Hospital Initiative. With more than 3/4 of regional hospitals located in disaster-prone zones, this initiative was developed to enhance the resilience of these facilities to disaster and climate change, as well as to improve energy efficiency through the adoption of green technology. Therefore, if we can achieve this, there is no excuse for industrialized nations to fall behind. However, Madam Speaker, reducing emissions alone won't build resilience. Our countries need equitable funding for mitigation, preparation, and recovery. We must shift the narrative from charity to justice and accountability. We are countries dependent on tourism, submerged in debt, and constantly battered by climate-induced disasters, leaving our islands with high death tolls and billions worth of damages. We receive far less climate finance than needed and are only given short recovery periods. For example, with the average GDP of $13.7 billion US, small island developing states have lost more than 11 times this amount in the span of 50 years due to weather, climate, and water-related vulnerabilities. Between 2012 and 2019, the Bahamas experienced a financial loss of over $4.2 billion US after widespread devastation caused by 4 major hurricanes. Unfortunately, many of our GDPs make us ineligible for the cheaper finance set aside for low-income countries, and some international financial institutions, such as the World Bank, do not fairly consider or acknowledge our exposure to these catastrophes. Therefore, let us insist on reforming outdated and unrealistic financial eligibility criteria. Replace GDP thresholds with the multidimensional vulnerability index, because income does not reflect the reality of our ecosystems or economies. Let us amplify the loss and damage fund established at COP27 and ensure it becomes a tangible reality. We must also embrace innovation, debt for climate swaps to help relieve our economic burdens while investing in resilience, advocate and apply for more grant-based funding for adaptation, loss, and damage, not loans, increase blue and green financing tailored to small island developing states' realities, and increase public-private partnership that prioritize sustainability over short-term profit. To those in a position of influence, we demand you reduce your emissions and contribute to climate resilience. And finally, let us remind the world, what we are asking of you is not pity. It is partnership and responsibility. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member from the Bahamas, Angel Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, distinguished delegates, and fellow advocates, I stand before you today as a proud Bahamian, but also as a voice for the wider Caribbean family, a family fighting not just for progress, but for survival. For the Bahamas, climate change is not tomorrow's problem. It is today's reality. We know the trauma of Hurricane Dorian, when lives were lost, communities were shattered, and entire islands were changed forever. In fact, damages were estimated at roughly $3.4 billion, roughly a quarter of our GDP in just 2 days. But this story is not ours alone. Dominica, Barbuda, St. Vincent, Haiti. Every corner of the Caribbean has faced storms that can erase decades of development in just hours. And let us be clear, we did not create this crisis. The Bahamas and our Caribbean neighbors contribute a small fraction of global emissions. Yet, we bear some of the heaviest cost. That's not just unfair, it's immoral. Madam Speaker, we do not need sympathy. We need action. Industrialized nations must slash emissions now. We need climate financing that is fast, fair, and accessible, and real investment in resilience, renewable energy, stronger infrastructure, and smarter systems, so that the next storm does not push us back to zero. That is why the government created a new ministerial portfolio for energy with a dedicated focus on renewable energy. A practical step, because our survival depends on cutting emission, driving innovation, and achieving energy independence. But we cannot do it alone. To truly scale solar, wind, and battery storage to every island, we need affordable financing, fair technology transfers, and partnerships that close the gap between vision and reality. The Bahamas is embracing a new energy era, a transformative period defined by clean technologies, smarter grids, and sustainable solutions. Through modern energy policies, strategic partnerships, and investment in renewable energy infrastructure, we are charting a sustainable path forward. Yet, renewable energy is only a part of the solution. We must build resilient infrastructure that can withstand stronger storms and rising sea levels. We call on the global community to invest in green construction, innovative designs, and nature-based solutions like mangroves, seagrass, and coral reefs are natural shields against disaster. In April 2025, Minister of Energy and Transport, Honorable Jobed Colby Davis, addressed the signing of a power purchase agreement for renewable microgrids across New Providence and the Family Islands, designed to combine cleaner fuels, solar, and battery storage to improve reliability. Government reporting indicates New Providence is set to transition roughly 50% of its power to LNG by late 2025, with further conversions through 2026. These are steps on a larger path towards cleaner, more resilient energy systems. This work is grounded in our national commitments. The Bahamas NDC sets an ambition to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 30% by 2030 and reach at least 30% renewable energy in our energy mix by 2030. Part of our longer-term aim towards carbon neutrality. But progress must be accelerated. We ask our partners to join us in expanding climate education and training that ensures that Bahamians, especially our youth, are equipped with skills to lead the green transition and export expertise across the globe. National action alone is not enough. Our progress is strengthened when it stands alongside the efforts of our Caribbean neighbors. Countries like Barbados, which is making efforts to convert to 100% renewable energy by 2030, Dominica, which is pursuing geothermal resources to power the island sustainably, and Guyana, which is leading in forest conservation through its forest carbon credit programs, generating funding while protecting one of the world's most vital rainforests. Together, these efforts show the world that small island and coastal nations are not just waiting, we are acting. And as we act, let us work together and learn from each other, because our shared survival depends on unity, knowledge, and collaboration. Madam Speaker, I applaud our CARICOM leaders for standing as a united front. Together we have kept the climate crisis on the world's agenda, proving that small nations can wield enormous influence. But influence must be matched with support. We call on industrialized nations to honor their commitments, to unlock the billions pledged for climate adaptation, and to ensure those funds reach the people who need them the most, not years from now, but today. For countries like the Bahamas, survival depends not just on promises, but delivery. This is why we also call for innovative solutions, such as more debt climate swap mechanisms that allow vulnerable nations to redirect crushing debt payments to building resilience, expanding renewable energy, and protecting our people. The Bahamas' recent debt conversion deal was channeled through 120 to 124 million towards ocean and coastal protection. Such models can and should be scaled with international support. This is not charity, it is justice, and it is survival. But let us not be mistaken, this is not just a Caribbean struggle. The seas do not stop at our shores, the storms do not ask for passports. What happens to us today will happen to the world tomorrow. So hear me clearly, the Bahamas is not begging, the Caribbean is not pleading. We are demanding climate justice. Survival is not negotiable. Madam Speaker, let history never say that we stood silent while our islands drowned. Let it say that the Caribbean rose up, fierce, united, and unrelented, and demanded a future where all people in every nation could live with dignity, safety, and hope. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
As many? The chair recognizes the honorable member from the Cayman Islands, Raldane Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Honorable members, distinguished CARICOM leaders, my fellow Caribbean brothers and sisters, good morning. On behalf of the delegation of the Cayman Islands, I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to the Commonwealth of the Bahamas for such an amazing welcome. It is a really great experience. Now, Madam Speaker, I stand before you today not in joy, but in the waters that are rising. I stand in the heat that grows more unbearable with each passing year, and I stand in the storms that no longer visit as strangers, but are frequent, unrelenting guests. I stand on my Caymanian shores that are slowly disappearing beneath the waves, under skies that burn hotter even though we did not set them ablaze. I stand here carrying the voices of 3 small dots on the world map, the Cayman Islands. Small, yes, but not silent. Today I speak not only for Cayman, but for all islanders across the region whose cries are often drowned out by the roar of the very sea that threatens to consume us. The Caribbean contributes less than 1% of greenhouse gas, but still we pay the highest price. We are the ones rebuilding homes 3, 4, even 5 times while the main contributors are unfazed. Case in point, tomorrow marks 21 years since Cayman was hit by the most catastrophic hurricane we've ever seen. So catastrophic, many thought there was no more Cayman. Relief efforts brought body bags to recover people because we were seen as underwater on the map. This damage cost us over US $3.4 billion, which equates to approximately 183% of our GDP in one night. Ivan broke our people, but it did not break our spirits. Short-term recovery efforts took about a year, and for Cayman to return close to its initial state, approximately 5 years. Madam Speaker, we acknowledge the impact climate change has on us. Research predicts that by 2100, Cayman could lose up to 12% of habitable land. To our leaders, this Honorable Youth Parliament commends CARICOM for their significant efforts. However, there must be some more accountability on the global stage. As a region, it is important that we stand together as one. Let us be that Category 5 hurricane that cannot be stopped. Madam Speaker, if we amplify our voices at these global tables, there's no chance that we will be sidebar. We collaborate regionally, but find ourselves being strangers on the international stage. Let us use our CARICOM relations to show unity on the global stage to advocate for stronger policies that are mutually beneficial. Not all policies will be perfect, but a common agreement that works for most goes further than us all disagreeing. As an associate member, the Cayman Islands is represented by the UK in these rooms, but rest assured, as your Caribbean neighbors, we will support as much as possible because we feel the effects as well. Madam Speaker, the first way in which we can be that Category 5 hurricane is to strengthen our advocacy for the full operation of the Loss and Damage Fund, as my friend from Guyana said. At COP27 in 2022, world leaders finally agreed to establish a fund to help developing countries coping with the irreversible climate impacts. The concept is that countries contribute to the fund based on how much emissions they contribute. However, it has not been finalized. For places like the Caribbean, this fund represents more than hope. It represents a path to recovering from disasters, restoring communities, and holding accountable those whose emissions cause the most damage. We know the storms will come, but the recovery process is what we struggle with. Madam Speaker, there are many times when we depend on each other to recover from these disasters. Sometimes approval for funding can take days, weeks, and even months. By then, people are already suffering. Madam Speaker, while the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility has been a lifeline by providing payouts within 14 days after hurricane, earthquakes, and floods, it cannot cover every loss or every community. That is why CARICOM should strengthen CCRIF's model by creating a pre-approved emergency fund, a reverse pool that governments can tap into immediately after disaster strikes, then repay once recovery stabilizes. Together, CCRIF and a regional emergency fund would give us both the speed of rapid insurance payouts and the flexibility to fill critical gaps, ensuring no Caribbean nation is left waiting weeks or months for help while other people are suffering. Madam Speaker, I want to highlight that the Cayman Islands Parliament is moving to be an e-parliament. All member of parliaments have been provided with a laptop. This aids in our efforts to reduce our carbon footprint by going paperless or significantly reducing the use of paper. This may seem small compared to global emissions, but it shows that even as an associate member of CARICOM, Cayman is committed to doing its part in reducing our carbon footprint. Madam Speaker, as I close, our good friend from Jamaica, Bob Marley, reminded us, get up, stand up. Stand up for your rights, all right. But we have remained seated for way too long. This is what this resolution is about. It's not begging for charity, but it's demanding justice. To our CARICOM leaders, I implore you to listen keenly to our suggestions and to take them into consideration. Because we're the generation that will be adversely affected by these storms if we don't put the necessary plans in place. Madam Speaker, for too long we have been sitting and ordering turtle stew, conch fritters, doubles, flying fish, pepper pot, and jerk chicken, and our bill for steak, lobster, and caviar. Let us take a stand with our policies and say, excuse me, waiter, wrong table. Thank you.
As many. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Guyana, Arsha Singh.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Honorable guests, I rise today representing the Cooperative Republic of Guyana to give my full support to this motion. Because the truth is simple. Climate change is not coming, it is here. Across the world, seas are rising, temperatures are rapidly increasing, and disasters are harsher and more frequent. But for the Caribbean, especially low-lying small island states, this is not just an environmental problem, it is an existential threat. In Guyana, like my colleague mentioned, which is a mainland territory, about 90% of our population lives along the coast, on land that is just 1 to 1.5 meters below the sea level. Imagine that. The sea is rising and we're living below it. When harsh floods struck our coast, like in 2005 and 2021, entire communities were underwater. Farmers lost their rice fields, cash crops, and livestock. Now, for a country where agriculture sustains our economy, these disasters are not just inconvenient, they're devastating, Madam Speaker. When floods overwhelm our land, the damage goes far beyond homes and roads. Our food security is under direct threat, with saltwater intrusion ruining once fertile land, while erratic weather disrupts planting and harvesting cycles. And the costs are staggering. In 2021, the floods alone wiped nearly 7% of our GDP. Climate change is not just an environmental issue. It is an economic, social, and a national crisis. Yet, Madam Speaker, as our colleagues here have recognized, Guyana stands in a unique position. We're not only a mere victim of climate change, we're one of its strongest defenders. With over 85% of our land covered in forest, Guyana has the second highest forest cover on Earth. These forests store nearly 19.5 billions of carbon dioxide equivalent, which is almost half of what the entire world emits in a year. It is on this strength that since 2009, Guyana has developed the Low Carbon Development Strategy, or the LCDS, the first of its kind from a developing nation. Through this strategy, Guyana has proven that ecosystems are worth more alive than destroyed. Our partnership with Norway earned us over $200 million from 2009 to 2015 in results-based payments for our forest climate services. These funds were not just there. They created low-carbon jobs, powered Amerindian villages with renewable energy, and strengthened flood defenses. This is living proof that when developed nations actually step up, vulnerable countries can build resilience and sustainability. Furthermore, this year Parliament must endorse our leaders' efforts to demand both urgent carbon emission reductions and accessible financing. These are not handouts. They're a matter of fairness and justice. Development and environmental protection are not opposing goals. They are inseparable. The Low Carbon Development Strategy for 2030 shows what is possible. It outlines how Guyana can grow its economy while keeping emissions flat. How? By moving from heavy fuel oil to natural gas as a bridge, then to hydropower, solar, and then wind. If a developing country like Guyana can do this. Why can't the industrialized world? But, Madam Speaker, we must also go further. This motion calls for recommendations to CARICOM, and the LCDS provides a roadmap. First and foremost, CARICOM should champion mechanisms that properly value our ecosystem services. For example, Guyana's forest alone provides 40 to 54 billion US dollars in value to the world each year. But this is unrecognized. Forests must be worth more alive than when they're dead. Secondly, our industrialized nations need to adopt a global carbon price to phase out fossil fuel subsidies. This will ensure that low-carbon solutions are the most affordable and competitive. In addition, CARICOM should also insist on accessible and direct climate finance, meaning that funds must not only reach governments, but also communities such as farmers, indigenous villages, and vulnerable groups that are already facing these harsh rising seas and erratic weather. Lastly, we must deepen the regional cooperation in renewable energy and the blue economy. This can be done through investment in hydropower, solar, wind, and sustainable development across the Caribbean. Madam Speaker, the message is clear. The Caribbean may be small in size, but we are not small in vision. Guyana's LCDS proves that low-carbon development is not a mere dream. It is a reality, but we cannot shoulder this burden alone. Industrialized nations must face their responsibility, reduce emissions, and deliver the financing that justice demands. This Youth Parliament must add its voice by endorsing our leaders and demanding accountability. And we call for bold, united CARICOM action to ensure that the world listens. Because climate change will not wait. It will not pause while leaders debate or while nations delay. For Guyana, for the Caribbean, for our very survival, the time for action is now. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
As many. The chair recognizes the honorable member from Antigua and Barbuda, Jessica Zuder.
Madam Speaker, thank you for your kind acknowledgement. Madam Speaker, distinguished members of this regional youth parliament, members in the gallery, and those viewing online, good morning. I rise today in strong and unwavering support for this resolution, because for us in Antigua and Barbuda and the region on a whole, climate change is not tomorrow's problem, it is today's emergency. Climate change is real. We feel the heat every day, and I know you guys felt the heat yesterday, and I sure did when I was under the shade, still getting sunburnt and being red today. Climate change cannot be denied, but the question is, what can we do? The resolution rightly acknowledges that, open quote, the health of Earth's climate and environment has been on a decline as a result of the growing presence of carbon and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, end of quote. For small island states like ours, this decline is not abstract. It is a matter of life and death. In 2017, Hurricane Irma devastated Barbuda, destroying 95% of its infrastructure and forcing the complete evacuation of its people. That storm confirmed what this resolution warns, open quotes, the unpredictability of the weather in response to changes in the environment poses a risk to every country in the world, end of quote. We hear it here. We've heard our Guyanese brothers and sisters. We've heard our Caymanian friends. We've heard the Bahamas. It is a reality that we are facing within the Caribbean region. Antigua and Barbuda is not alone in this struggle. The truth is that the Caribbean countries all share these vulnerabilities. We in the Caribbean are among the lowest emitters of greenhouse gases, but we are suffering the most, as has been said, whether it is the rising sea levels, swallowing our coastal lines, stronger hurricanes flattening our infrastructure, or prolonged droughts threatening our water supplies and crop growth. This is the very definition of climate injustice. Those who pollute the most bear the least of the burden, while those of us who pollute least stand to lose everything. Our realities may differ in degree, but they are united in nature. That is why regional integration, such as forums like this, matter. This is why we must have a unified voice on climate justice. Madam Speaker, we've been speaking a lot about the realities of climate justice, and I want to focus on a very important part of the resolution, and that is finance. The rules of global financing are simply unjust. For too long, access to concessional financing has been determined by GDP per capita. This blunt tool tells us that Antigua and Barbuda is high income. It says the same of St. Kitts and Nevis. But what it ignores is that one hurricane can wipe out more than an entire year's GDP overnight. GDP does not measure vulnerability. GDP does not measure resilience. GDP does not measure survival. But Antigua and Barbuda has chosen not to be silent. We have chosen to be a voice of leadership and accountability. This is why we are championing the Multidimensional Vulnerability Index, or the MVI. It measures our true exposure to environmental, economic, and social shocks. If adopted globally, the MVI would ensure that small islands like ours are not left behind when it comes to accessing life-saving funds. The MVI tells the truth. It recognizes that a country's ability to withstand external shocks is not measured by income alone, but by exposure to climate disasters, economic fragility, and social vulnerabilities. With the MVI, the world can no longer hide behind false labels. With the MVI, small island developing states can finally access financing based on our realities, not on outdated metrics. At the national level, Antigua and Barbuda, through our Department of Environment, has established the Sustainable Island Resource Framework Fund, better known as the SURF Fund. This is a one-stop shop which channels international climate funds directly into renewable energy, coastal protection, water security, and resilience projects. It ensures that the financing spoken about in this resolution actually reaches our communities in Antigua and Barbuda. At the 4th International Conference on the Small Island Developing States, so SIDS-4, held in Antigua in May 2024, global leaders gathered under the theme, Charting the Course Toward Resilient Prosperity. Out of that conference came the Antigua and Barbuda Agenda for SIDS, which endorsed the use of the MVI and charted a 10-year plan to address our vulnerabilities. Madam Speaker, the fact that Antigua and Barbuda hosted this pivotal event shows our country's commitment to ensuring that small island voices shape the global agenda. On the international scale, Antigua and Barbuda has pioneered in climate justice. Through the Commission of Small Island States on Climate Change and International Law, or better known as COSIS, which we co-funded with Tuvalu, we have pursued an advisory opinion before the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea and the International Court of Justice. These efforts aim to hold polluting states accountable under international law. As this resolution urges, we must continue to agitate for Caribbean countries to have access to funding to help with mitigation, preparation, and recovery efforts. Legal advocacy, alongside financing freeform, is central to that fight. Madam Speaker, let me also emphasize that this is not just an issue for governments and diplomats, but this is an issue the youth of this region recognize as urgent. Only last month, the inaugural sitting of the Eastern Caribbean Youth Parliament Network took place in St. Kitts and Nevis, which saw youth from Antigua and Barbuda and St. Kitts coming to the Parliament and debating a resolution. And what was the topic of this resolution, you might ask? Climate resilience and sustainable development, much like we are discussing today. The fact that youth across the Eastern Caribbean and the Caribbean at large come together to debate, discuss, and propose solutions with so much passion as we've seen today proves that climate change is not a distant concern for us. It is a living, urgent, and threatening issue.
Honorable member, would you need an additional 2 minutes?
Madam Speaker, I do see that my time has expired. May I humbly request an additional 2 minutes?
Yes, you may.
I am grateful. It is one we are prepared to act upon. And so I do hope that the voices today do not fall on deaf ears, and that this does not become another tokenistic sitting. I therefore endorse this resolution wholeheartedly, and I make the following recommendations in recognition of regional unity and integration. 1, that CARICOM states collectively demand the global adaptation of the Multidimensional Vulnerability Index as the standard for determining access to international financing. Secondly, that we replicate the Antigua and Barbuda Surf Fund model across CARICOM, ensuring direct access to climate finance for every member state. Thirdly, that we strengthen our legal advocacy together by uniting through COSIS so that polluters cannot evade accountability. Additionally, we should build on the momentum of SIDS and ensure that we highlight and adapt the Antigua and Barbuda agenda for SIDS, which was adopted at the SIDS conference, ensuring that it guides regional policy. And finally, that young persons be given a permanent seat at the table in climate negotiations. And I don't simply mean just a seat, but we need a vote and a voice. This resolution affirms that we must demand that nations of the world take steps to reduce their carbon footprints. And it is we, the youth, who will live the longest with the consequences of their failure to do so. Madam Speaker, Antigua and Barbuda stands as both a victim of climate change and a leader in climate justice. But let us be clear. The vulnerabilities we face are not ours alone. They are shared by every Caribbean nation, and it is only by speaking with one regional voice that we can turn our vulnerabilities into strength. By endorsing this resolution, we are not only standing with our leaders, but we are declaring to the world that the youth of the Caribbean will not accept empty promises. We demand fairness, we demand justice, and we demand action. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
As many. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Guyana, Sia Bacchus.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, fellow youth parliamentarians, as the third Guyanese speaker to rise before this youth parliament, I assure you, I am not here to repeat my colleagues, but if you hear too much about forests and low-lying coastlines, I beg your patience. After all, when three Guyanese speak, you know the matter must be serious. But in truth, Madam Speaker, this is no laughing matter. Let us not waste words admiring the problem. Let us speak today as if the survival of the Caribbean depends on it, because it does. For too long, small states like ours have borne the brunt of a crisis we did not create. Rising seas threaten to wash away our coastlines. Stronger storms devastate our economies, and unpredictable weather jeopardizes our farmers, our food, our families. Yet, while we are among the most vulnerable, we are also among the most determined. Madam Speaker, Guyana remains committed to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Through our Low Carbon Development Strategy 2030, we are proving that economic growth and environmental protection can go hand in hand. With more than 80% of our landmass covered in forests, Guyana is removing carbon from the atmosphere and acting as a lifeline for the world. We are also advancing SDG 7, affordable and clean energy, investing $51.2 billion in hydropower, solar, and wind so that our people can enjoy sustainable energy and our region can reduce dependence on fossil fuels. In agriculture, Guyana is leading with climate-smart innovations, protecting food security in the face of floods and droughts. in pursuit of SDG 2, Zero Hunger. And through our mangrove restoration and biodiversity protection, we are safeguarding SDG 14 and SDG 15, life below water and life on land. But Madam Speaker, let me emphasize, our national efforts, no matter how ambitious, will never be enough if industrialized nations continue to pollute without accountability. If promises remain unfulfilled, the Sustainable Development Goals will remain words on paper instead of reality for our people. Honorable members, I submit that the Caribbean must act with unity and urgency. On behalf of Guyana, I put forward the following recommendations. Equitable access to climate finance. Climate finance must not be trapped in bureaucracy. Guyana calls on CARICOM to demand simplified direct access to funds like the Green Climate Fund, ensuring that vulnerable states receive resources swiftly, especially after disasters. Secondly, institutionalize youth participation. Guyana recommends that Caribbean youth be positioned not as participants, such as my fellow from Antigua and Barbuda, but as decision makers, innovators, and guardians as accountability. We must be in the negotiation rooms, leading innovation hubs and publishing the scorecards that measure progress. Anything less is not inclusion, it is tokenism. Thirdly, technology transfer and capacity building. Developed nations must share renewable energy technology, coastal defense systems, and disaster-resilient tools, such as building infrastructure that can withstand climate change. More importantly, they must train our people so that we can maintain and expand these systems ourselves. A regional climate research and resilience hub. CARICOM should establish a hub dedicated to real-time data, climate research, and early warning systems, protecting our region against hurricanes, against floods, and droughts. Knowledge must become our shield. Stronger global accountability. Now, we must not whisper on the global stage. CARICOM must speak with one voice at the COP and the UN General Assembly, demanding binding agreements that hold high-emission countries accountable. We must also ensure the Loss and Damage Fund is fully operationalized so that when our disaster strikes, our recovery is supported. Regional solidarity for the SDGs. Finally, Guyana calls for greater cooperation amongst ourselves. Shared renewable grids, joint agriculture research, coordinated disaster response. This is how the Caribbean can embody true solidarity in sustainable development. Madam Speaker, the SDGs are not distant ideals. They are a lifeline for nations like ours. I will echo my colleagues. Climate change is not tomorrow's problem, it is today's emergency. And if the world delays, we, the youth of the Caribbean, will not. Let this Parliament send a clear message. We are united, we are unyielding, and we will not be silent until justice is served, equity is delivered, and sustainability is achieved. The Caribbean may be small in size, but we are mighty in voice. And when we rise together, we rise not only for ourselves, but for the generations yet unborn. Thank you.
As many. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Trinidad and Tobago, Ferdinand Heragobin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for allowing me to enter and contribute to this debate. I rise today on behalf of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, and I rise with urgency, because this debate is not about the past. This debate is not about statistics. This debate is not about distant predictions. This debate is about our very survival of small island nations like ours. Here in the Caribbean, we are on the front lines of climate change. We did not cause this problem, but every rainy season, every hurricane season, we feel its impact. Imagine rising seas are eating away at the coastlines in Manzanilla and Mayaro. Imagine flash floods turn Port of Spain into a river. Imagine landslides in the northern range cut off communities from the rest of the country. Imagine farmers in Aranjuez, North Trinidad, suffer from flooding, but farmers in Barapore suffer from drought. But this is not an imagined scenario. This is our current reality. Trinidad and Tobago may be south of the hurricane belt, but we are not safe. Just last year, we watched Hurricane Beryl tear through the Caribbean. If a system like that was just to shift south a little, the destruction in our country would be unimaginable. No longer would we be able to say, God is a Trini. This climate crisis is not a matter of just justice. Trinidad and Tobago, much like the rest of the Caribbean, is one of the smallest polluters in the world. Yet, we face great risks. Meanwhile, the industrialized nations, the ones who grew rich by burning oil and coal for centuries, are the ones whose emissions are heating our skies and drowning our coastlines. This cannot be right. This cannot be fair. We in Trinidad and Tobago are not standing still. As an energy-producing country, we understand our responsibility. We are diversifying our economy and investing in renewable energy. Programs like our iCare recycling initiative and the proposed 240-acre solar farm in central Trinidad show that we are acting. Wealthy nations pledge billions, but when our communities flood, our crops fail, these funds are locked behind paperwork, delays, and every single red tape excuse available. The Paris Agreement was supposed to change this. It was built on fairness. I agree, all countries must act, but those with the biggest footprints must act first and act faster. Too many nations are failing to meet their proposed and agreed upon emission cuts and climate finance commitments. Small island states are paying the price. If the Paris Agreement is to mean anything, it must move from fine words to firm action. I must stand and support the sentiments of my brother from Guyana. The youth of the Caribbean cannot and will not accept inaction. It is not about statistics on a piece of paper. This is about real individuals whose future is up in the air. While our children grow up in safe communities, will they inherit coastlines that are washed away by the sea? Will youngsters have opportunities here at home, or will they become climate refugees? So today, I join my voice with that of the Caribbean to say clearly, enough is enough. We call on industrialized nations to cut their emissions, to meet their Paris Agreement commitments, and to finally deliver real, accessible financing for mitigation, preparation, and recovery. Anything less is betrayal. As we endorse the work of our leaders, I make the following recommendations. Establish a CARICOM climate risk insurance pool. Work with global insurers and development banks to create a regional system that allows for payouts after hurricanes, floods, or droughts. Secure technology transfer. Use the Paris Agreement provisions to demand affordable and accessible access to renewable energy systems, early warning technology, and coastal defenses, funding and shared by developed nations. On behalf of Trinidad and Tobago, I say this: our people will not go quietly into the rising tide. We will fight for climate justice. We will hold the world accountable, and together, as Caribbean nations, we will stand stronger than storms. I thank you.
As many. The chair recognizes the honorable member from the Bahamas, Hannah Miller.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker. Fellow delegates, members in the gallery, good morning. Madam Speaker, I rise today in full support of the resolution before us, one that speaks not only to the environmental challenges confronting the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, but to the indisputable threat facing all small island developing states across the Caribbean. This is not just another item on the agenda. It is a call to action, a blueprint for urgent intervention and long-term resilience. This resolution is about our future. It's about safeguarding our homes, our livelihoods, and the very survival of our islands. Madam Speaker, the science is clear, but so too is our reality. We do not need satellite data to tell us that our shores are eroding and that our fishermen are struggling. The Caribbean continues to bear the brunt of climate change. Each year on June 1st, citizens across the Caribbean sit in their homes with anxiety, oftentimes with the Weather Channel playing in the background, praying that they are spared from the wrath of another hurricane. However, with the effects of climate change, Madam Speaker, just an hour or two of rain would make the busiest of streets in New Providence unpassable due to flooding. And if I can speak candidly, Madam Speaker, this ain't the same sun I grew up playing in. It's too hot. Madam Speaker, we are grateful for the tireless work of our leaders, many of whom sit in this room today, who have elevated climate change to the top of both regional and international discussions. Their efforts, particularly in making climate change a standing agenda item at the CARICOM Heads of Government meetings, have helped frame this issue for what it truly is, a matter of life and death for our nations. But we, the youth, must now take the baton and push further. The time for symbolic gestures has passed. We must act, and we must act decisively. With that in mind, Madam Speaker, I offer the following recommendations. First, we must implement stricter environmental legislation across the region, aligned with the CARICOM Environment and Natural Resources Policy Framework. These laws must not only exist on paper, they must be enforced. From mangrove protection to plastic pollution to corporate accountability, our laws must reflect the urgency of the crisis we face. Second, we should strengthen the climate studies program at the University of the West Indies. I recommend that our governments provide a scholarship through the Ministry of Education or the Ministry of Environment to fund scholarships for their citizens, enabling them to become experts in climate science, policy, and innovation. After graduation, provide a space in the relevant ministry for their expertise to be used. Let us follow the example of young Bahamians like Dr. Trevor Johnson Jr. and my fellow delegate, Ms. Amber Turner, both of whom are graduates of this program, who are pioneering new ways to create a more sustainable, climate-resilient Bahamas. Third, we must adopt a clear and accountable timeline for transitioning away from non-renewable energy sources and scaling up renewable energy infrastructure. No more vague targets. We need measurable goals. Solar and ocean-based energy are not just environmental solutions. They are economic opportunities. Finally, Madam Speaker, approximately 16 countries are a part of the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, which aids in providing short-term liquidity after natural disasters. Unfortunately, Madam Speaker, though these funds are helpful, many times they are insufficient. My final recommendation is for each country to establish a disaster reconstruction fund, which can be financed through allocating a portion of the country's annual budget to it, or allocating 1% of revenue from value-added tax annually. An example of this is the Resilience and Regeneration Fund, which is established in the Republic of Barbados. Madam Speaker, we live in a region that is battered annually by storms that are becoming more intense and less predictable due to global warming. We cannot wait for help. We must prepare to help ourselves. And in doing so, we must also hold the major global polluters accountable for their roles in this crisis. Madam Speaker, these are not abstract ideas. They are real, they are actionable steps that can be implemented with political will and regional cooperation. They will save lives, they will protect economies, and they will ensure that the Caribbean remains a place we can proudly call home. Now I understand there may be concerns such as fiscal limitations, implementation challenges, questions of feasibility. These are valid, but let's be clear. Caribbean people are bold people. A bold, well-designed action yields greater returns than timid half measures. The investments we make today will secure our environment, strengthen our economies, and reinforce public trust in our institutions. Madam Speaker, today as people united, determined and steadfast we stand, we look to a brand new horizon, the future now firmly in our hands. With this excerpt from Celebrating CARICOM, as young people of the Caribbean, we are no longer asking for permission to lead, but we are stepping forward with purpose and vision. Madam Speaker, leadership is not just about managing the present. It is about envisioning the future and daring to shape it. And so today, by debating this resolution before us, we send a message to our leaders and to the world. We are ready, we are resolved, and we will rise to this challenge together. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I would like to take a moment to acknowledge and thank the Honorable Member for Bamboo Town and the Honorable Speaker of the Bahamas for being here today. Your presence is greatly appreciated, and we love having you around. As many? The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Turks and Caicos, Aja Rigby.
Madam Speaker, my esteemed colleagues, members in the gallery, good morning. Madam Speaker, I rise today to represent my country, the Turks and Caicos Islands, to contribute to this critical discussion by suggesting robust strategies that CARICOM and our regional partners should advance to the developed, industrialized nations, urging them to reduce their carbon footprint, which continues to accelerate the warming of our planet's surface, for which we, the small islands and developing states, mostly feel the ripple effects of. Before I proceed, Madam Speaker, I invite this honorable House to pause and reflect, to consciously think and picture our lived reality, our Caribbean nations in the grip of a devastating disaster, one brought about by the unchecked acceleration of greenhouse gases into our atmosphere. In fact, Madam Speaker, allow me to paint that picture. In 2017, the Turks and Caicos Islands, along with other Caribbean nations such as Cuba, Haiti, the Dominican Republic, and other nations, including the Bahamas, where this 47th Parliamentary Association Conference is being held, suffered devastating effects of a Category 5 hurricane. Madam Speaker, her name was Hurricane Irma. Irma shattered lives. Turks and Caicos Islanders' livelihood were greatly impacted from the island of Providenciales to our nation's capital, Grand Turk. People's homes were severely demolished, trade between the United States and the islands temporarily ceased, and the Turks and Caicos Islands, like many other Caribbean islands, rely heavily on importation. Even our cornerstone industry, tourism, the lifeblood of our economy, was brought to a standstill. Madam Speaker, this stands as a stark reminder that climate crisis is not a distant threat, but it is our inevitable lived reality. Madam Speaker, science confirms this inevitable reality. According to scientific reports, journal, environmentalist Andrew Gardner conducted a study comparing the intensification rates of tropical cyclones between the periods of 1971 to 1990 and 2001 to 2020. The findings are very alarming. The data reveals intensification's rate of 28.7%, Madam Speaker. I regurgitate 28.7%. Further, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in its third assessment report has projected that the global mean of surface temperature will rise from 1.4 to 5.8 degrees Celsius. This means, Madam Speaker, that storms are not only becoming more frequent, but also more powerful, posing an ever-growing threat to small island and developing states like ours. In addition, Madam Speaker, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has forecasted that the 2025 Atlantic hurricane season will be above average. As a result of this, Madam Speaker, I suggest that CARICOM and associate members put forward above average recommendations as a united voice to industrialized nations such as the United States, China, and the United Kingdom. Not merely because we in the Caribbean and South America are disproportionately impacted, but because it is our duty as nations, as leaders, and as stewards of creation to preserve and protect our planet for generations to come. Madam Speaker, I propose in this honorable parliament that CARICOM and its 5 associated members should advance to industrialized nations. Firstly, stronger implementation of energy portfolio standard in industrialized nations, and also advocate for power supplies companies to form a renewable energy that is used for supply throughout their nations. Madam Speaker, we must urge industrialized nations to enact robust domestic legislation that makes it mandatory for corporations, industries, and even governments themselves to comply with green energy portfolio standards. Mere advocation without action are spineless. Binding laws with strict penalties for non-compliance will ensure that promises are formed into measurable action. Madam Speaker, secondly, but not least, I call for the enforcement of shared patent treaty for renewable energy projects modeled on the landmark principles of the United Nations Doha Declaration. When the world was faced with HIV and AIDS pandemic, the Doha Declaration ensured that life-saving medications became accessible through patent sharing and licensing. Today, Madam Speaker, we face another global crisis, climate change, that demands equally bold action. A shared patent treaty for renewable energy would require industrialized nations to share patent for critical green technologies, solar panels, wind turbines, and other energy storage systems, with both developed and developing countries at a reduced cost. By breaking down barriers to innovation, Madam Speaker, we ensure that every nation, regardless of wealth, has access to tools
Honorable
needed to
member,
combat.
your time has expired. You may proceed for an additional 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We ensure that everyone has access, regardless of wealth, to combat climate change and protect our environment, and ensure a sustainable future for generations to come. Madam Speaker, our message to large nations must be united and strategic. in order to reduce carbon emissions, implement robust domestic legislation. Madam Speaker, for Caribbean nations, this is not mere frivolous policy. It is policy to protect and safeguard our existence. Thank you.
As many. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Turks and Caicos Island, Manuel Gardner.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. From the east, west, north, and south, our banks and oceans meet. Surrounding sands and hills of glee, our pristine beauties see. In these words of the Turks and Caicos Islands national song, we find our natural resources, our economy, and our very survival, all of which are tied to the land and sea that surrounds us. But Madam Speaker, the treasures described in our song, the banks, the oceans, the sands, the hills, are not guaranteed forever. They are under pressure from global forces beyond our control. And so, as youth parliamentarians, we must add our voices to the chorus of Caribbean leaders who are calling not only for the protection of our environment, but for the preservation of our economies that depend upon it. Madam Speaker, when I hear the words, as the song continues, "Maintain this land of ours," I feel a deep conviction. For me, those words are not only poetic, they are a call to stewardship, to action, to responsibility. If we are to maintain our land, then we must confront the realities that threaten it. The resolution before us points first to the growing disasters we face. And like me in the past, you may have a problem or question the premise of the resolution altogether. But the evidence is undeniable. In the North Atlantic, the probability that a storm will reach major hurricane status, Category 3 or above, has increased by 49% per decade between 1979 and 2017. Rapid intensification is now more common, with intensification rates up to 28.7% higher in the modern period compared to earlier decades. In the Caribbean itself, Category 4 storms have risen by 23%, and Category 5 storms by a staggering 226% when compared to our historical baseline. Beyond hurricanes, Madam Speaker, we know the devastation of flooding, mudslides, and storm surges that wipe away not only infrastructure, but family homes and livelihoods. These disasters, once rare, are now part of our yearly reality. I acknowledge that not every locality shows the same pattern. For example, a study centered on Barbados found no long-term change in the immediate zone. But across the Caribbean and the North Atlantic, the trend is unmistakable. Stronger storms, greater risk, and heavier costs for small island nations like ours. The resolution further notes that the Caribbean is uniquely vulnerable. Temperatures in our region have been rising at about 0.2 degrees Celsius per decade since 1991. Subsurface ocean waters are warming at a similar rate, nearly 3 times the global average. Sea levels are rising by an average of 3.4 millimeters per year since 1993, and more recently at 6.15 millimeters per year since 2004. Tide,
gauges near Jamaica confirm increases of over 3 millimeters per year for low-lying islands like Turks and Caicos, my home. These numbers mean saltwater intrusion, coastal erosion, and a greater burden for every hurricane season. And yet, Madam Speaker, the Caribbean is not the biggest polluter. Far from it. We contribute little to the problem, but we carry much of the burden. That is why this resolution insists that the large nations, the ones with the greatest carbon footprint, must be held accountable, both by reducing their own emissions and by contributing financially to mitigation, preparation, and recovery in small island states. Here, I'm reminded of the words of Psalm 24, verse 1, which many of you may know. The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof. The world and they that dwell therein. This verse reminds me that creation does not belong to us. It belongs to God. Our task, therefore, is stewardship. To maintain this land of ours is our task. When the land suffers, when the seas rise, when storms intensify, we are failing in our duty to care for what has been entrusted to us. But, Madam Speaker, let me also quickly place this into the economic frame for my own country. In Turks and Caicos, tourism is our backbone of our economy. It represents nearly 40% of our GDP, over 20% of government revenue, and employs nearly 1/3 of our workforce. More than 1 million visitors arrive every year, and their dollars sustain our livelihoods. Yet, in 2020, when the pandemic struck, arrivals collapsed. Overnight stays dropped by 77%, cruise arrivals plunged by 81%. Our economy contracted sharply, exposing just how fragile dependency on one industry can be. By God's grace and resilience, we have recovered. In 2022, GDP grew by 6.2%. In 2023, it surged by 13%. But look at it. The rebound was powered again by tourism, construction, and real estate. Our economy remains overwhelmingly service-oriented, 90% of our GDP. And our trade deficit is vast, with $487 million in imports, but only $5 million in exports. This imbalance cannot sustain us indefinitely. Madam Speaker, therefore, I submit this. Protecting our environment is not separate from protecting our economy.
Honorable member, you can have an additional 2 minutes to wrap up.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Every storm that erodes our beaches erodes our livelihoods. Every inch of sea level rise is another blow at our balance sheets. That is why this resolution's call is not only for environmental justice, but for economic justice. But, Madam Speaker, we must recognize this. Divided, the developed world will always find a way to avoid accountability. If one island raises its voice alone, it is too easily ignored. But when the Caribbean speaks with one voice, through CARICOM and through forums like this youth parliament, we become impossible to dismiss. Madam Speaker, to maintain our land, we must guard both its beauty and its economy. We must hold the world accountable, but we must hold ourselves accountable to build resilience and independence. Thank you.
As many.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honorable member from Barbados, Denzel Green.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Ma'am, these days are indeed funny nights. This moment must be met with the seriousness and sense of urgency it deserves. And though views may differ, as individuals will either assert or refute the existence of rapid changes in our environment, there is no denying that a change is indeed taking place. And ma'am, while I come to understand that yes, a change is indeed taking place, I have also more profoundly come to know that change in of itself is inevitable. It is guaranteed to happen. We continue to see the devastation across our Caribbean region. And the reality is, for us, the adverse effects of climate change certainly are no joke. But we have borne witness to how suddenly characteristics in our environment can change. Whether it be the eruption of the La Soufrière volcano in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, or the freak storm that caught Barbados a bit by surprise, or even right here, ma'am, in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas that saw great devastation towards some of its islands because of the passage of Hurricane Dorian. But even in the midst of all of that, ma'am, I am cognizant of the fact that small island developing states will continue to face this challenge and fix it, in the words of former Prime Minister of Barbados, the late Honorable Owen Seymour Arthur. We must not throw our hands up in despair, because we must get together, and it may not seem like it may not feel like it, but listening to us here today, I know without a shadow of a doubt that it will be all right, because we are indeed one Caribbean. And Speaker, I am indeed grateful to be here and grateful for this resolution today, because not only does this resolution speak about the problems and the effects of climate change across this uniquely diverse region, but more importantly, this resolution seeks to challenge us here as youth parliamentarians to bring about some sort of resolution and solutions to the problem. And Madam Speaker, it is within that, it is against that background that I would like to make the following recommendation today, and that is investment in climate resilient infrastructure. Because let's face it, the infrastructure across the Caribbean region was arguably built decades ago, and regrettably, for the most part, our infrastructure right now seems to be a bit inadequate to deal with the pressing issues as it relates to climate change. According to the National Hurricane Center, a Category 5 hurricane can reach up to 157 miles per hour, and ma'am, this is concerning. We must revisit the way our housing stock is structured, both public and private. Additionally, Madam Speaker, within making reference to the climate resilient infrastructure, we also have to give this generation a voice. And that is why I am glad that we are here, right here in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, advocating and making recommendations to leaders across the Caribbean. I am proud to say here this morning that back home in Barbados, the gem of the Caribbean and indeed the diamond of the world, we continue, Madam Speaker, in spite of all the differences and difficulties we face, we continue to punch above our weight. And I say so, Madam Speaker, because today, Barbados has the largest amount of electric vehicles in the Caribbean and arguably in the Western Hemisphere. We continue to punch above our weight. The Caribbean is indeed a place of diversity, and we can learn a lot from each other. But going on further, Madam Speaker, additionally, recently through the Ministry of Education, we have established something like what of a climate school. Because if we are speaking about investing in climate resilient infrastructure, then we must look towards the future. And what better way to do that but equipping this generation with the necessary tools to do so. And we have recently established, like I said, something like a climate school, and that is the Oceania Innovation Hub. Because we must revisit the way we have architects, we must revisit the way we invest in our carpenters, Madam Speaker, we must revisit the way we invest in engineers, because we can be the leading ones here across the region to send a strong message to the world that enough is enough, but not only that enough is enough, but that we are willing to face this problem, like I said, Madam Speaker, and fix it. Ma'am, I am a bit fed up because and rightfully so, Madam Speaker, because those international players who like to pride themselves on being at the center of global politics, they continue, Madam Speaker, to ignore what is happening to us here in the region. But nevertheless, like I said, we here in the Caribbean will punch above our weight. And I ask the question, what will it take? What will it take for them to act? Recognizing that their inaction is quite literally costing lives. What will it take? And how longer, Madam Speaker, will those international players continue to ignore, or how longer, Madam Speaker, will those international players continue to perpetuate and not pay attention to the issues facing us, or simply how long will the world continue to shoot itself in the foot until it realizes that it cannot stand anymore? Madam Speaker, recognizing that the bell has been rung, I will conclude shortly. Madam Speaker, additionally, another recommendation that I would like to put forward, ma'am, is investment also in climate-smart agriculture. Because let's face it, if both of them go hand in hand, and if we want to build the necessary infrastructure to make us truly climate resilient, then we must be able to grow what we eat and feed those architects, those engineers, those working hard in the field to make that climate resilient infrastructure a reality. As I conclude, Madam Speaker, I am ever cautious or cognizant. I am ever grateful to know of the fact that despite what others may believe, that this generation will be a generation to bring about the much-needed change that the world has so longed for. This generation, Madam Speaker, will be the generation to fight the good fight. This generation, Madam Speaker, will be the generation to turn the tide of the rapid changes in our environment. This generation, Madam Speaker, will be the generation to bring about the much-needed change. And I say to us in this Regional Youth Parliament today, and to those watching in the gallery, let's get ready to fight this good fight. And with that, Madam Speaker, I am obliged to you.
As many. The chair recognizes the honorable member from Barbados, Rakaya Shepherd.
Madam Speaker, thank you for your acknowledgement. Madam Speaker, honorable members, distinguished guests, and viewers online, good morning. I rise today as a proud representative from my very small but mighty nation, Barbados, a small island that continues to be on the front line of climate change. Climate change is not a distant threat. It is a present crisis. Climate change refers to the long-term alterations to the Earth's climate system, particularly shifts in temperature, precipitation, and weather extremes, persisting for decades or centuries. While natural processes such as volcanic eruptions and solar cycles have historically influenced climate, the current phase of rapid warming is driven primarily by human activities. The burning of fossil fuels, deforestation, and industrial practices have released unprecedented levels of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, intensifying the greenhouse effect. According to the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, it is unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean, and land. These global changes have profound implications, particularly for vulnerable regions such as the Caribbean. Climate change today is impacting our everyday life. Our islands are warming, our seas are rising, and our people are feeling the strain. Fiercer hurricanes like Dorian in 2019 and Beryl in 2024 have torn through our communities, destroying lives and livelihoods. Rising seas are swallowing our coastlines, threatening tourism, housing, and even the very existence of some nations. Our coral reefs, natural shields that protect our shores and sustain our fisheries, are bleaching and dying under rising ocean temperatures. Without them, we lose biodiversity, food security, and vital income from tourism. Our farmers, too, are on the front line. Shifting rainfall patterns, longer droughts, and sudden floods put entire industries like Jamaica's coffee and Barbados sugar at risk. And because our region depends so heavily on imported food, every disruption in the global supply leaves us more vulnerable. This is the Caribbean's climate story, a fight not for survival, but for security, prosperity, and dignity. We are among the least responsible for this crisis, yet we are paying the highest price. That is why the Caribbean must continue to lead with one voice, demanding climate justice, pushing for bold global action, and building resilience at home. Now, therefore, be it resolved that this Regional Youth Parliament recommends to CARICOM the following strategies to persuade leaders of industrialized nations to reduce their carbon footprint and to uphold their responsibility in the fight against climate change. Firstly, CARICOM should strengthen diplomatic pressures by advocating as a unified bloc at global forums at the United Nations and Conference of the Parties. By presenting climate change as a multifaceted issue encompassing environmental, human rights, development, and security concerns, Caribbean states can compel industrialized nations to acknowledge their moral and legal obligations to reduce emissions. Barbados, led by our Prime Minister, the Honorable Mia Moore-Motley, has not only been on the front line of climate impacts, but is also leading globally through the Bridgetown Initiative. Through the Bridgetown Initiative, Barbados has taken on the Goliath of an outdated financial system, demanding fair access to climate funding, debt suspension after disasters, and true climate justice. If one small island can command the attention from world leaders, then imagine the power of a united Caribbean voice. As our Prime Minister would have said, our world knows not what it's gambling with, and if we do not control this fire, it will burn us all down. This is not just a warning, it is an action, it is a call to action. What we also need is for industrialized nations to stop making pledges and not being held accountable for delivering on them. CARICOM should press for the establishment of a binding climate finance mechanism where industrialized countries contribute to a Caribbean climate resilient fund. Such a fund would provide resources for adaptation, mitigation, and recovery efforts. To ensure credibility, CARICOM must advocate for robust monitoring, reporting, and accountability systems to track the disbursement and the effectiveness of these funds. And while this opportunity may be highly beneficial in the fight for change, let us move forward with something bigger by creating a Caribbean Youth Climate Delegation, which would involve young people directly in international negotiations, ensuring that youth voices are taken seriously, adding both moral authority and urgency to advocacy efforts. CARICOM should establish this delegation to engage directly with leaders of industrialized nations during international summits, serving as a constant reminder that the survival of future generations are at stake. Furthermore, youth advocacy networks should be leveraged to apply global public pressure on governments that continue to lag in meeting their climate commitments, ensuring accountability and momentum in the fight against climate change. Similar strategies have been successfully implemented in countries like Finland, Costa Rica, and New Zealand, where youth councils actively participate in climate policy making. Lastly, the region should demand structured agreements for technology transfer and knowledge sharing from industrialized nations. Caribbean states need access to cutting-edge renewable energy solutions, climate-resilient farming methods, and disaster-proof infrastructure. Basically, the tools to survive rising seas and unpredictable storms without having to MacGyver our way through every hurricane. Because trust me when I say, I am tired of hearing my granny say, try and fill up some buckets before the water go and they can't cook my food. I'm tired of it. By investing in green technology and building local capacity, we can reduce dependence on fossil fuels, create sustainable jobs, and empower communities to build long-term resilience. So, Madam Speaker, the Caribbean is on the front line of climate change. We are paying the price for the emissions of industrialized nations.
Honorable member, you may have an additional 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We are paying the price for the emissions of industrialized nations, from rising seas and stronger hurricanes to bleaching coral reefs and threatened livelihoods. These are not just distant threats. These are real, immediate, and affecting our communities, our economies, and our way of life every single day. But we are not powerless. Through diplomacy, advocacy, climate finance, and technology, we can demand action, we can demand resilience, and we can protect the future of our people. What we have the knowledge, the creativity, and the determination to face this challenge. What we need now is the global cooperation and accountability that industrialized nations must provide. The time to act is now, not tomorrow, not next year, but now. Every delay increases the cost, the risk, and the suffering. Our islands, our communities, and our children cannot afford to wait. The Caribbean is resilient, united, and ready to lead, and we will not be ignored, and we will not stand by while our future is at stake. And with that, Madam Speaker, I am obliged to you.
As many. The chair recognizes the honorable member from the Bahamas, Bryant Lowe.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, delegates, distinguished guests, and regional friends, I come before you today to speak on an issue that hits the most vulnerable first and hardest, one that in an instant can stagnate our progress as small island developing states, even though we are not the cause of it, one that we must use our shared voices against because it threatens our very existence, and that is the effects of climate change. And Madam Speaker, that is the importance of conferences such as this, where we, along with our regional partners, can speak directly to our own lived experiences, appreciating that each country's experience holds uniqueness, but understanding that points mentioned are consistent among us all. Madam Speaker, we meet at a crucial moment in global history where the threats we face, from rising sea levels to collapsing biodiversities, are not distant possibilities. They are realities that reshape our economies, our politics, and our way of life. In 2019, Hurricane Dorian made the stakes painfully clear for the Bahamas when it struck our islands with a force that we were not and could not prepare for, hovering over our islands for more than 40 hours with winds exceeding 185 miles an hour and storm surges that submerged entire communities, threatening the greatest resource our countries have to offer, the lives of our people. We may be small, but Dorian sent a global message that the surrounding water that defines our geography, our economy, and our identity currently defines our greatest risk, with rising seas and warming oceans posing a significant threat to our very existence, and this is the reality that we are burdened with. Madam Speaker, the government of the Bahamas continues to take decisive and tangible steps to address the climate crisis with the urgency it demands. Our country has expanded our network of marine protected areas not only to conserve biodiversity, but also to enhance our national resilience to the impact of climate change. In recognition of the critical role played by our coastal ecosystems, inclusive of our mangroves, our seagrasses, and our coral reefs, we are advancing policy frameworks to support the development and trade of blue carbon credits. These ecosystems sequester vast amounts of carbon and serve as a natural defense against coastal erosion and extreme weather events. Their protection is both an environmental imperative and an economic opportunity. Madam Speaker, we are also progressing steadily in our efforts to transition to a more sustainable energy system. While we acknowledge the significant economic constraints we face as small island developing states, we remain committed to reducing our dependence on fossil fuels and embracing cleaner, more resilient energy solutions. These initiatives reflect our government's firm commitment to safeguarding our environment, strengthening our economy, and securing a sustainable future for my generation and for generations to come. While these are necessary steps, we recognize that it is not sufficient. Systemic support is paramount. While much larger countries whose success and development hugely contributed to this crisis point fingers at each other, we have pleaded for relief after disasters. But now we must strongly advocate for climate finance reform on a global scale. And Madam Speaker, I draw inspiration from the father of our nation, Sir Lyndon Pinland, when he said, if Bahamians are not prepared to stand up and defend their own Bahamas, then we don't deserve to have it. The issues he faced may have been different, but the point still stands, and the next generation still deserves this country. Madam Speaker, it is increasingly clear that the international financing system must undergo urgent and meaningful reform if it is to adequately support vulnerable countries on the front line of climate crisis. For small island development states like ours, climate finance must be timely, accessible, and responsive, particularly for adaptation and resilience, where the needs are immediate and the stakes are existential. The promises made, most notably the pledge of $300 billion per year in climate finance at COP29, must be honored in full. We welcome this recent progress made at the conferences of party in addition to the implementation of the loss and damage fund at COP28. However, the success of these mechanisms depend not only on political will, but on predictable, scaled-up financing that reaches those who need it most. Madam Speaker, existing tools such as the Green Climate Fund and the Global Environment Facility must be strengthened and streamlined. Bureaucratic barriers must not prevent small nations from accessing the resources we require. At the same time as new financial mechanisms are designed, they must be built on principles of equity, climate justice, and the right to development. Our government remains committed to advocating for a more just financing structure, one that recognizes the vulnerabilities, supports our ambitions, and enables us to build resilience in the face of an increasingly volatile climate. Madam Speaker, as I close, I want to reiterate, the climate crisis is not a distant threat. It is a lived reality for our people. As a small island developing state, we have contributed the least to global emissions, yet we face some of the most severe consequences. Our response, both at home and on an international stage, must be bold, coordinated, and rooted in justice. We are doing our part, protecting our ecosystems, transitioning our energy systems, and building resilience, but we cannot do it alone. We call upon our international partners to match ambition with action and rhetoric with resources. Let us work together to build a future that is sustainable, equitable, and secure for our generation and for those yet to come. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
As many the chair recognizes the honorable member from the Cayman Islands, Jordan McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, they call our islands paradise. And Bahamas, I can't argue with that. Things are indeed better in the Bahamas. But they are, of course, best in Cayman. Yes, Madam Speaker, we are indeed paradise, but today paradise is under pressure. My name is Jordan McDonald, and I'm representing the pristine Cayman Islands. I'm one of the last speakers, so I'll be very direct and sharp, but I apologize, I can't promise I'll not be long. Sorry, Madam Speaker. I agree with the resolution, but let's be real. Agreement without accountability is just decoration, and decoration has no place in the Caribbean. What we need now is action, Madam Speaker. I agree that CARICOM needs a single voice, but for that voice to be more than talk, we need to cover our bases, and we need to truly unite. Madam Speaker, before we look to the big industrialized giants, and we tell them what to do, we need to look at ourselves. We need to take a look in the mirror. We know the story. corruption, short-termism, weak oversight. These are not foreign imports. These are homegrown barriers. We cannot fight climate change with one hand while the other hand is in the public purse. We cannot cry for global justice if our people cannot find justice in their own homes. Madam Speaker, if these problems corrode our national systems, how can we expect a regional system to stand tall? Madam Speaker, the Caribbean should be in a far better place than it is in today. But we have held ourselves back a lot, and we need to take accountability. For this resolution to work, Madam Speaker, we must become strong. We must truly unite. That's how our voice is more than talk. So yes, Madam Speaker, we must demand climate justice on the international scale. But first, we must each individually practice climate justice at home. Let us insist on transparent budgets, public audits, and consequences for misuse. Let us show our people that climate money does not vanish into paperwork, but it builds seawalls, it strengthens roofs, and it powers homes. Yes, Madam Speaker, we must unite. But let's be honest, unity is not a warm handshake or a polished press release. Unity is sacrifice. Unity is discipline. Unity is holding your neighbor accountable even when it's uncomfortable. Imagine what true unity would mean. A regional resilience fund that actually disperses when disaster strikes, not years after when the headlines fade. A rapid response corps of Caribbean engineers, doctors, and logistics experts, so when a hurricane hits, the first boots on the ground wear Caribbean flags. Because, Madam Speaker, we have learned already that we cannot depend on these other nations. We must also be vigilant about who we invite to the table. Large corporations will come smiling. They will promise green solutions, but behind the smile is a profit sheet. We cannot allow the same profit-first culture that drives big pharma to creep into sustainability. Because if climate resilience becomes a business model where only the rich can buy in, then we have already failed. What good is solar power if only luxury homes can afford panels? What good is sustainable housing if the price locks out the very citizens we claim to protect? The Caribbean climate economy must not be another playground for profiteers. It must be a safety net for the ordinary fisherman, the single mother, the farmer whose crops are on the line. And Madam Speaker, while I speak, what is the point of YP if our own parliamentarians don't listen to what we're saying? Sustainability, Madam Speaker, must be accessible. If the average Caribbean citizen cannot afford it, it is not sustainable. It is exploitation dressed in green. And Madam Speaker, that has nothing to do with me being dressed in green. Simply a coincidence. And as I continue, Madam Speaker, I beg to speak plainly. My beloved country, the Cayman Islands, is often seen as three mere dots on the map. A speck, barely visible on the map. Too often, that dot is treated as a footnote in regional discussions. But let me remind this chamber that dots matter. That dot is home to over 80,000 people. That dot manages a global financial hub. Clock it. That dot hosts a vibrant culture and contributes to regional discussion. Madam Speaker, for some other small Caribbean countries, the same is true. But for us to truly become one Caribbean, we cannot continue to measure importance by square miles. If we are truly one Caribbean, then every nation, large or small, populous or tiny, must be treated as an equal. A chain is only as strong as its smallest link. And in the Caribbean, the so-called small links carry the same weight of responsibility as the big ones. So let me be clear. The region will only thrive when every dot is respected. Madam Speaker, and here's the part that troubles me most. Though we have shared many struggles
Honourable
together...
member, you may have an additional 2 minutes to wrap up.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Though we have shared many struggles together, it is when we advance as nations that we begin to drift apart. And that is tragic, because advancement is the very moment when we need each other the most. Our potential, or great potential, makes us a target for exploitation, for pressure, for division. But our shared history, our shared resilience, and our shared vision makes us overcomers. Yes, we survived slavery. Yes, we survived hurricanes and earthquakes. And now, Madam Speaker, we must survive climate change. But let us not make the mistake of fighting it in isolation. Alone, we are vulnerable. Together, we, the Caribbean, are formidable. So I stand in support of this resolution, not blindly, but critically. Support without scrutiny is complacency. We must unite, yes, but with accountability. We must demand finance, yes, but with transparency. We must invite innovation, yes, but never exploitation. And so, to the host country, the Bahamas, thank you for your warmth and hospitality. Your pristine beaches, your breathtaking islands, and your vibrant culture, they are not just postcards. They are living proof of what we stand to lose if climate change wins. So let us make sure climate change does not win. Having spent the time I have with my fellow delegates and my fellow youth parliamentarians, I am truly convinced that the entire Caribbean community can and will overcome whatever happens. So let this regional youth parliament send a clear message that we will not be a victim of climate change. We will be architects of our resilience. We will unite, we will innovate, and we will take action and hold ourselves to the highest standard. If not when, if not now, when? If not us, who? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
As many. The chair recognizes the honourable member from Trinidad and Tobago, Jada McLeod.
I thank you for the opportunity to complete this very timely discussion. Now, I'm not here to engage in debate on whether or not climate change is real. I see it in the devastation of coastal erosion of Mayaro and Manzanilla, communities in my home country of Trinidad and Tobago. I see it in the flooding that has become almost routine for communities across my country. And let's not talk for the extreme heat facing us almost daily. For us, climate change is not a theory that one can provide his 2 cents on. It is a daily lived reality. Therefore, the resolution before us recognizes a simple truth. Small island states like ours are disproportionately vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Rising seas, intensifying hurricanes, unprecedented heavy rainfall, and flooding, among other unpredictable weather patterns. These are no longer projections. They are facts of our lives. But, Madam Speaker, this conversation cannot be separated from the geopolitical realities we face today. Let me speak from my home. Trinidad and Tobago sits at the doorstep of Venezuela, a country rich in oil and gas, but fractured by crisis. To our north, the United States remains both a powerful ally and a country with one of the largest carbon footprints in the world. Our nation is therefore caught in the cross-currents of energy geopolitics. On one hand, if I am to lay out the facts so that my colleagues can draw their own conclusion, The U.S. has interest in securing energy supplies and containing instability in Venezuela. On the other hand, Venezuela's own crisis has driven people to the shores of Trinidad while leaving its vast resources, oil and otherwise, largely untapped. Meanwhile, Trinidad and Tobago is still heavily dependent on hydrocarbons for economic survival. In this global game, the voices of small island states are too often drowned out. Yet, it is we, not the big emitters, who face the flooding and the devastating erosion of our lands. That is why this resolution is not only about climate science, it is about climate justice and international fairness. Industrialized nations have built their long wealth on fossil fuels while demanding that we bear the consequences. It is unjust, and I will not have it. Madam Speaker, I support this resolution because it strengthens our regional unity. But beyond support, I believe CARICOM must take concrete steps. Allow me to recommend 3 clear actions. Forging a Global South Climate Alliance. We must deepen ties with friendlies willing to help like Africa and the Pacific Islands Forum. Together, we represent dozens of nations who face the same threats. By forming a united bloc, we can exert real negotiating power in forums like the Conference of the Parties, or betterly known as COP. In fact, an alliance at this year's COP30 would be a powerful look. Number 2, current climate funds are hard for small states to access. We must push for direct, simplified financing mechanisms. In fact, let's take a look at how industrialized nations honor their now $300 billion annual climate finance pledge. We want some of that. We must demand that special priority be given to vulnerable state islands like ours. You cannot tell me the money is not there when the US, one of the world's largest carbon emitters, has a military budget of just under the $1 trillion mark. Who are you going to shoot at when the world is dead? My third and last recommendation is to establish training and scholarship programs and encouraging youth leadership that allows for a percentage of qualified students to engage in advanced climate tracking technology education. Larger countries and nation bodies like the EU and China, who have invested in technologies like the EU's Green Deal Industrial Plan, and China, who operates the world's largest carbon markets, can open its doors to us, allowing for modern technologies to be brought back to our shores. Lastly, almost like you are doing now, but grander, give youth an action seat at the decision-making table in CARICOM's climate delegations, and empower us to lead innovation projects in adaptation and disaster preparedness. We already have organizations devoted to making a difference. In fact, I call to mind the youth at the Trinidad and Tobago Youth Council, who have been calling for the ratification of the High Seas Treaty since Adam himself was a little boy. As spoken by former US President Barack Obama, we are the first generation to feel the full effects of climate change, and we are the last generation that can do something about it. Madam Speaker, none of these are abstract ideas. In fact, I made it so clear that an infant may agree. For Trinidad and Tobago and the rest of the Caribbean, these are survival strategies and ensuring that our people are not left to pay the price of others' pollution. If we fail by doing nothing. We risk becoming climate refugees in lands that are not our own. We must be leaders, demanding not charity, but justice. I therefore stand firmly in support of this resolution, and I urge this Parliament to continue empowering its youth voice by utilizing recommendations made today in the Global Chorus for Climate Justice. And with that, I rest. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The resolution is agreed. And before we adjourn, I would like to make a quick announcement. Today, lunch will be downstairs in the Tamarind Marketplace, and delegates, all of you are asked to meet in the hotel lobby at 6:15 p.m. to be transported to the venue for the Prime Minister's reception and the cultural display. Adjournment. The chair recognizes the honorable member from the Bahamas, Angel Johnson.
I move that the 18th Regional Youth Parliament, at its rising, do adjourn, sine die.
Is there a seconder? The chair recognizes the honorable member from the Bahamas, Alexandria Umbristol.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that the 18th Regional Youth Parliament, at its rising, do adjourn, sine die. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. This Regional Youth Parliament stands adjourned, sine die.